time spending, I feel dizzy. Cause some people love, now they miss me. I've been feeling low, I gotta hit save. I've been feeling low, I gotta hit save. A little time on my mind, let me find my peace. Write a hook in a book and rewind the beat. Little time on my mind, let me find my peace. Write a hook in my book to rewind the beat.
We are back again, ladies and gentlemen. This is the A.T.T.I.C.S podcast. We will do a round of applause because we're still doing audio. So, round of applause for yourselves for tuning in, for joining. We'll appreciate everybody. We appreciate everybody listening, everybody coming in, and seeing what we got to talk about today. So, to my right, I have our wonderful, wonderful hosts, Dr. V. You want to talk to the people, introduce yourself.
So, hi, everyone. So, Dr. Nikki. So, I'm excited and honored to be here tonight, especially in light of our topic. And so, we hope that if you all have any questions, comments, or whatever, that you'll be able to interact with us in the moment as we kind of process and talk about some things tonight.
And you, young lady?
Just Shannon.
Just Shannon. All right, everybody. Shannon, Dr. Nikki, y'all know me. I'm Courtney. You call me Courtney. Ali or Suggs.
And do you identify as a what today?
Hey, listen, I identify as a season today, the season summer. So, yeah, that's what we're going with. And the share sometimes. All right, sometimes. It depends on how I'm feeling. Good to see y'all, my sisters.
Good to see you.
Glad y'all are here. Well, I guess without further ado, we'll get to it. Talk about this week, what a week it was. Shannon, if you want to start off by leading us, we'll kind of just walk through this step by step, piece by piece. But yeah.
Yep. So we're just going to do a little recap about what happened this week and why we're here talking about this today. But on Monday, April 29th, 2024, an armed suspect opened fire on law enforcement officers in the 5,000 block of Galway Drive in Charlotte, North Carolina. 8 officers in total from both CMPD and the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force were shot, 4 of which succumbed to their injuries. Those heroes are CMPD Officer Joshua Eyer, North Carolina Department of Corrections investigators Samuel Poloche and William Alden Elliot, and United States Marshal Thomas Weeks. One of the wounded by gunfire was Statesville PD Officer Casey Hoover. The other 3 from CMPD were officers Christopher Tolley, Michael Giglio, and Jack Wowers. Also injured was CMPD Officer Justin Campbell. And at this time, we'd like to have a moment of silence.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So, if you have or have not been following this week's events, that's kind of the aura in the room today. I know typically those of you know us know that we have that bright kind of vibe to us, and that's typically how the pod goes, and that'll be how the pod goes today. But we'll talk about a couple of things, and kind of the first thing that I want to kind of touch on, Shannon, before we really dive into the topic is just how are y'all? How are y'all coping? How's the healing process going? Kickstarted.
I think I'm, fortunate to be in a position to be here for people and actually educate folks on what they might be going through, and being here with Dr. Nikki and doing that. So obviously I'm not with this department anymore, but just being able to be a support for people is truly an honor. So
Yeah, I'd say the same for me, because just like you guys, being able to do something, even though we know there's really nothing we can do, but just being here, showing up, is helpful for me. It makes me feel like I'm contributing in some way to this horrific thing. But just like what you said, Shannon, the fact that we want to get information out to everybody, because there is no reason why anybody should suffer any more than what's naturally going to happen. There is resources, there is information, there's accurate information that people can have access to, and you don't have to settle for anything less than the best. So anyone that is listening to this, anybody, but particularly all of you that have faithfully served and continue to serve, you can have the best, and you do not have to settle for anything less than that. And so we're just going to make sure that you are guided in the right direction, and at least have questions that you can start asking yourself and other people to make sure it is what you and your family are going to need.
And just before we get to you, Court, we set up a number, so if you guys have questions or if you need to reach out and ask for help, that number is 336-443-0535. Again, that's 336-443-0535. How are you doing, Court?
I'm okay. I've been appreciative of all the love and support that have poured out to myself and all my brothers and sisters that knew everybody impacted by this tragedy. It's been a different week for sure, because a lot of times I have been that person where people could call me if they needed to talk, and I found myself this week being on the other side of that. Started off a little different, the first stages of seclusion, maybe kind of the grief stage. And then I was, able to kind of pick up from there and move forward. It's still a process, still processing, still kind of moving through, because again, this is, to the world, maybe the way how fast life moves is now kind of behind you, especially after the services and stuff start to happen or have happened or happening. To the rest of us who are still in it, processing it, this is, a perpetual thing. Every day we wake up, you remember, you relive it. We still got to lace up. There's still many of us that are lacing up, still going to work, still doing, everything that we were doing for the past however many years. And so that's just been the part that's helpful and hurtful at the same time, because you realize that life still goes on, which is kind of like, I feel like, for the longest time, the world should just stop. Everybody should just stop doing what you're doing. Everything else should just stop, and we should just all like kind of collectively move through this or process what's going on, and that's just not reality. So I say all that to say, it's been a journey. It will be a journey, but I'm faithful. I'm appreciative. We'll get through it. Shout out to everybody. Shout out to y'all first and foremost, because the people who will hear this, the people who are watching this, know the work that y'all been doing behind the scenes with no request for recognition or anything, but the lives that y'all are impacting with everything that y'all are doing. I'm very, very thankful, very, very grateful to even be sharing space with y'all. Y'all know how I feel about y'all, so we gonna do that like that. But yep, that's it in a nutshell. Shout out to that.
So last year, 2023, 378 officers were shot in the line of duty, with 46 of them being killed. So far in 2024, there's been 140, with, I guess the statistic is one shot every 21 hours. And you were kind of touching on that, like time doesn't stop, and you gotta get back, lace up the boots, put the uniform back on, and do it again, and sacrifice. And a big question is why? Why do people do it? Why do you come back? Why am I coming back? What else could I do? So I guess, Court, Why? Why do you keep coming back?
It's like a good question. Not because it just sounds good to say, but I think that's the question that I've had, most of us have had. And I've been asked that, like, why continue to do it if you know ultimately that could be the sacrifice and or consequence of someone else's actions that you have no control over. And I don't know if I have the best answer for that, but what I do know is there's still people that need me. There's still people that need us. Those calls don't stop. Life circumstances, those hard moments don't stop. And God has given me the ability to be able to impart some of my heart, mind, body, spirit, whatever you call it, into this career that ultimately helps people move through situations like this. Because realistically speaking, we're not the only people going through this right now. Like someone else had a tragedy similar to this on a different magnitude, but has impacted them just as much. So when you ask why, I think about how I feel, and then how I feel when those people like yourselves have helped me in this time. And to be able to be that person for those individuals who are grieving, are suffering too, that's what's going to help me. So it's kind of selfish, but I'm still doing it because I get joy. I get a peace. I get a sense of gratitude, a sense of purpose out of going into a situation that's absolutely terrible and providing just a little bit more comfort. Whenever I see, whenever I talk to, whenever I leave that situation, it's just a little bit better. And I say this all the time. Whitney will tell y'all, even a little progress is progress to me. So I'll take it.
Doc, what do you say to officers or officers' family that ask that same question? Why are they doing it? Why should I do it? Should I still do it?
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to them?
Well, I think that's a very normal question to be asking, particularly in this time. And I would also tell them, don't feel bad about asking the question. But I was having a conversation with someone in the media the other day, and she was asking me these same kinds of questions and asking what the community could do. And particularly now more than ever, I think because we've talked about this with you all, that you do an abnormal job. And when you are impacted by these types of critical incidences on this magnitude, but just on the day-to-day, just bad calls, right? You start to begin to believe that the world is a bad place. The world is not a safe place, but particularly your community doesn't want you, right? It's isolating. It can feel heavy. It can feel like, why were we targeted? Why, we're just out here helping, and it doesn't seem like anybody cares. So what I have told them is that right now, more than anything, anybody in the community needs to stop you all whenever they see you and tell you thank you and that they love you, so that they and you all begin to see that there's actually more people in this community that love you, that need you to do what you're doing, than there are those others that make the bad decision. And so we need to be pouring more into you so that why that's, I guess, initiated coming becomes more clear and becomes, you're more confident in it, right? Again, we talk about how, all the time that over the course of your career that why may change, right? And it does in many ways. But this is one of those times where it is completely appropriate to reassess the why, right? Is the why still strong enough and still gives you the confidence and the courage every day to make that ultimate sacrifice? And if it is not, that is okay, right? But if it is, I think having this family discussion right? Because for many people, your why was as an individual, right? And then you had family that came into this. And as a family, what is our why? You, of course, have your individual whys, but what is our why as a family? Because now it's not just you putting on the uniform, right? It's your family members every day putting on that uniform each time you walk out. And so what is the why that will bring them into the service and the calling? Because it's now your mission as a family together. And what do they need to feel? Because like you said, Court, I mean, we can't control people, right? And unfortunately, as long as we live in this world, evil exists. And unfortunately, we can't eradicate it. It's a fact of life. And so knowing that, how do we best prepare ourselves and our families to be able to feel like we have the ability and the support to confront evil when it does knock on our doorstep? So I don't know if that answers kind of your question, but it starts you to thinking about, well, what is your why? Yeah. And it can be different for everybody, but it has to especially be something that sustains you, that you can anchor like you're doing. That at the core of you, as horrible as this is right now, that gives you the energy and the motivation to push through the days that you really don't want to, right? So
let's dig in a little bit. Officers are, on average, and obviously this depends on the city and department size you work at, but on average, 178 critical incidents over the course of their career. What is a critical incident, your definition, Doc, and how that can impact first responders long term?
Yeah. So believe it or not, I'm about to tell you all something that is probably a way that you've never even considered a critical incident, particularly in law enforcement, because you all are trained that you have this list, and this is what makes a critical incident, right? Mass casualties or an OIS. But the true definition of a critical incident is that anything, and it can be anything, that your typical normal coping skills are overridden, right? So what I may be able to do on a typical day, if I encounter something and now none of my coping skills are coming to the rescue and nothing is working, well, that is a critical incident. So when I say, even to parents, sometimes when I'm talking to them about, their child seems to be just so dysregulated and they don't really understand what's going on. But the child just experienced something as simple in the parent's mind as moving, right, a new school. But they're not taking into account that this child's world has just been flipped upside down. All the security, all the consistency, all the safety, everything has just been thrown out the window. And all the parent is seeing is that we're together, right? We're moving, we're bettering ourselves, we're improving.
Right.
But in that child's mind, that was a critical incident because nothing you do, right, is soothing them, is calming them.
Right.
And so even for us, if you think about various points in our lives where we might have been in a situation where like we were completely overwhelmed with some type of emotion that kind of put us at a standstill, right? And we couldn't figure out how to push through in that moment to get through to the next day. That could have been a critical incident. And it doesn't have to be, like I said, a shooting or something like that. So that's something to keep in mind, especially as you with officers, because I'm thinking that a lot of times if it doesn't fall into the Big Ten that we like to call it in law enforcement, that if it happens to be a divorce, maybe it was a bankruptcy, or something that is, personal and private, that doesn't constitute a critical incident, and that somehow you should be able to strap those boots up and then push forward and be able to do your job. And that is a lie. That is not the truth.
But I was like, while you were saying that, it kind of dawned on me some of the ways that I particularly have looked at that in the past. So when you think about, this is something I had to mature on, but you think about as an officer or a first responder or someone growing up in an area where there's violence, right? You think gunshots, almost getting shot, car accidents, all that horrible stuff that, is the worst in life. But it kind of never hit me until maybe we started doing this, that whatever is the worst thing that happened to somebody, that's the worst thing that happened to them. So like the death of a pet could be just as traumatic as someone getting shot. You know what I mean? And I was not able to wrap my mind around that for the longest of times when you talk about critical incidents and you talk about kids moving schools and stuff like that, how like small of a life event as an adult we see that, but how that can change the trajectory of a child's life because you think friends, social development, and things of that nature. So I'm saying that because I don't know what it took for me to get to that point, but do you know things that people do to help them kind of realize that, or is it just life experience, more so talking to people, more so being around people, getting to understand different perspectives and things of that nature?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that helped, I believe you get there, and that helps most people, is the willingness and the ability to self-reflect, right? We don't, nor will we ever have all the answers, right? But the ability to look at how I am being impacted and how I am impacting my environment, right? And that also goes into developing empathy too. So the ability to be able to look at another's situation and to have some type of ability to put yourselves in their shoes.
Right.
If you don't have the ability to self-reflect, right, to think about, I wonder how that would impact me.
Right.
What would I do? How would I? Then you're not going to be able to do that, right?
I think that's a big issue in this profession too, especially, like the culture, because one, we don't really self-reflect. Like we kind of put it away in our attic and not deal with it, but like you take a critical incident and every person is going to respond to it differently based on the experiences you were talking about. But say this person's struggling and this person's not, and this person goes and says, hey, I don't think I can come to work today. I'm not good. Well, I was there too. You better come to work. I'm here. So we have that kind of mentality in this profession where it's an automatic judgment thing. Like, and you don't want to say anything because you're worried about how it's going to be perceived by somebody else if you're not okay. Mm-hmm. So like then you compound, like you're talking about childhood critical incidents, but then 178 on average, which is probably a lot more. But you compound and compound and compound and compound, and you just keep having these and adding. And where does all that stuff go if we're keeping it in and close to the chest and not asking for help or not talking about it because we're afraid of what other people are going to think? Yeah.
Well, you bring up a good point too. Is you all are not robots and you're not created equal.
Yes, I am.
I know, right? But surprise, we're all individuals, right? And not only are we genetically, biologically different, but like what you were talking about, we have life experiences that are different.
Yes.
And so what may be traumatic for you might not be traumatic for me. And so I cannot judge that's why I was having this conversation with someone. Do you know why doctors don't give you a date on when you will recover? They want you to come back. No, because they don't know. They can give you an estimated time range when they think like the normal healing process should occur, but they don't know you. They don't know your genetic makeup, your body, how, what your ability to recover is. They can give you a best case estimate. So they're not going to put a time stamp date and say everybody should be well by this day and time, because that would be setting everybody up for failure. And so the same way with mental health, I cannot put a time step on anybody and say, well, sure, you all were there. Sure, you had the same call that you went on. But each one of you had a different filter through which you were experiencing that call. And that call has been internalized and set off a chain reaction of chemical reactions in your body and all of the things that are individually based that I cannot tell you without talking to you individually to hear what you may be struggling with, what you might need, and additional to assist that recovery.
Right.
Because I think if everybody had the ability to just come and sit down and say, hey, whoop, I just had something happen to me, and get in front of somebody that can at least listen to what is going on, listen to what the brain and the body is trying to do, then they would be in a better position to hand you tools that will assist the recovery process, right? So will assist with, handing and writing out a prescription, say, hey, if you swab this, 2 times a day, you're going to heal the wound. But if most people try to sit back and just suck it up like what you did, well, inevitably what they're doing is walking around on a sprained foot, eventually going to make it worse, right? And so it shouldn't be anything for anybody to get checked up, right? That doesn't mean everybody will need anything, right? Because there is a normal process that has to happen right now for everybody.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that because we don't want to interfere in that normal biological healing process, because the brain is actually set into process right now its natural healing process. The brain wants balance. It wants to restore. And so there's certain things that it's going to have to do on its own right now. And if we interject and we provide something that interferes with that natural healing process, we could prolong the healing or we could stop the healing. And so you have to allow yourself.
So what are ways that you would stop or prolong healing?
So one of the things that a lot of people do is go back to work too early before they're actually ready, right? Because we would never do that to somebody that was physically injured, right? We would make them what? We'd make them go see a doctor, maybe get an x-ray, maybe get some, referrals, just to make sure, right, that I know you said everything's okay, but you said that you're having some pain in that area. Let's check it out and make sure there's no serious injury, right? So a lot of people are telling everybody right now, I'm injured. You can't see my injury, but I know it's there. But because it may not come out or might not be displayed in the way that people think the injury should be displayed, they're saying, nah, go on back to work, right? Or they're telling themselves, you know what, I need to go back to work, or I don't have it I wasn't impacted as much as this person or that person. And they're comparing themselves to something that is not comparable, right? You can't tell me how bad your wound is by looking at me, right? And so that's not fair. And so that's one way in which they're impacting.
I think you said something that kind of like, again, you always say something that makes me think. However, like when you're talking, it's almost like a live therapy session.
Mm-hmm.
Because like going back to the part of like, I never knew you could get help too early. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like you could start doing things or asking for things or go seek things that might kind of create an imbalance for you. Like there is something to go through whatever it is that you're experiencing. Call it grief, call it the D word, depression, anxiety, whatever it is that you're experiencing, there's a natural reaction to this event. And I think as police officers, individuals, alpha personalities, whatever you want to call it, anybody that's experienced trauma, we don't want to lean into that. We don't want to lean into that hurt. We want to get away from it as soon as possible. So then you go, how quick can I get to the answer, and we skip the process. So when you say that, I think, excuse me, you kind of get to the part of like, don't skip the process, basically. Yeah, I think that's not necessarily profound, because when you say it out loud, it sounds like, okay, that's kind of like, yeah, I can see that. But when you sit down and think about it, like I was just trying to process while you were saying it, it's like, hey, how about you do whatever it is that you're doing and let that rock out. But let me ask you this just to piggyback, and I know Shannon will move over here in a second, but at what point do I say, okay, I need to get help? Is it like if I get stuck in that cycle, or is that cycle good for me? Do I need to keep repeating that, or what point is it that I feel like, all right, doc, I need help? Like,
Yeah.
am I going down, or what does that look like?
Yeah. So each one of you are going to hopefully, this is where self-reflection comes in, right? You've got to know yourself, right? You've got to listen. And a lot of you all don't listen to anything internally. Like,
That's a lot.
that's why, I know, right? Like, if you ask somebody, how are you feeling, right?
Right.
We've got how many feeling words in our vocabulary?
Good, fine.
Good, fine. Yeah. Yeah, and that's not true. Right? So when we actually ask you to sit there and to really pay attention, so a lot of times, you know how I can always tell when something's wrong with you? Every single one of you. I'm about to give you a number one question that you can catch me
I'm never going to do
and
it
any
again.
friends. I'll still be able to tell.
She knows.
I'll still be able to tell, because when we ask this question, we already know the answer, because we can look at you. How are you sleeping?
I already know the answer to his, because what time did you go to bed last night?
That's not what we.
Oh,
We are
we
here
weren't gonna
talking
talk about
about individual problems.
Y'all, hey, listen, y'all see how they put me on blast? That's crazy. I went to sleep at 1:30.
Okay. See?
He doesn't sip of energy drink.
Yeah, right.
So the number one thing that you can even ask yourself, right? How am I sleeping? Because you have got to sleep, for the body to recover. And the number one indicator for doctors and even in mental health is that you have disrupted, like your brain, right? It's off track, right? It's trying to look for something, but it hasn't yet really found something that makes sense, that it can grab a hold of, and that you're on the road, right? That we know that if you don't sleep, then you get sleep deprived, and then it makes it difficult to make good judgments and decisions, and then it's off the races, right, after that. So once you start noticing that your basic, it's difficult, right? You're not sleeping, you're not eating. At some point, some of those things for first few days, right? I mean, that is completely normal, right? It's thrown everybody's schedules off. But at some point, the body just naturally, there's basic needs that have to be met in order to keep the energy and the fuel going for the body to process and to start dealing with the bigger questions and the bigger issues. So if I don't have fuel in my body and I'm not resting the battery, guess what? There's no way you're going to heal.
Right.
So to all the folks that are and have been, I guess, walking around down in energy drinks and not sleeping.
It's inevitable. I mean, the cracks.
I'll say that crash is coming.
And don't push it, because, take care of yourself now, because when something shatters and breaks, it's not that it can't be glued back together, but it changes it inevitably forever. Like if you ever thrown a piece of china on the floor, you see how some people do art. They'll try to put, things back together by gluing it. But that china is never the same. Right? There's cracks. And even if you look at the best cracked art, right? Look at china, there's always a piece missing.
You just got to repaint it.
Repaint it. Cover up, right? Put a Band-Aid on it. Right. But at the end of the day, something that's cracked and broken is vulnerable and fragile at some point. Right? There's always a point that's going to be easily broken again. It's never stronger as it can be when it's first experienced. So just don't, like you said, don't avoid the process. But I'm going to be honest with you. I mean, it's scary, right? Because who prepares anybody for any of this? And when you don't know something and you don't know if what you're doing is going to get you the result you want, because we all just want to feel better, right? Everybody does. You don't want to forget. You just want the pain to stop. And if you can't be guaranteed or assured that doing this or doing that is going to make you feel better, you're probably going to avoid it, right? But what a lot of you do is you assume right? We fill in the blanks. How do you know it won't work if you've never tried it,
Right.
right? Or what's keeping you from risking the opportunity or the ability to receive the help? Vulnerability,
Fear.
right? And that's really what it is. And then that's where the self-reflection comes in. What am I afraid of? Because once you know what you're afraid of, you confront it, because then the monster is not a monster anymore. You know who the enemy is, and you can then find the equipment and find the people and the resources to confront and take down that enemy. But if you're just going in the dark, constantly battling something that you haven't identified the suspect yet, then it is scary. I wouldn't do it. So
I think, and this is just on topic, off topic, but when you say that, it makes me think about how the week started for me. Like, I remember the first day, it felt like I was in like this dream, and it was like a bunch of fog everywhere. You know what I mean? And I was talking with a brother of mine, and we were having this conversation, and the way that he and I both kind of described it was like, imagine if, I hate to use this example, but it's what we use, so hey, y'all take it. Imagine that being a teacher, right? And at the very beginning of the day, someone comes in and there's a mass shooting, right? And coworkers that you've known through the job but you call friends have now been killed, right? And you see it. You see other people get shot, and you're experiencing that emotion. You're trying to process it. You're assisting them with all of the above, and people end up dying, right? In our case, my case, someone that you work with for years, and then imagine having that being hours of your shift during the day, and by lunchtime, you have to go back in the classroom and continue teaching the curriculum to those students, because those students need to grow. They need to learn. They need you right now, because if you don't do that, something those students may miss may hinder their life going forward. And you wake up, you go to sleep. You go to sleep and you wake up and you do it again and again, and you're still feeling that feeling of like processing the moment, processing it. And shout out to, this is my shout out moment. Shout out to all of the people like yourselves and the agency and department, because they have been putting their foot forward. People have been trying and definitely been reaching out. Always more that could be done. Always different things that can be done. However, individuals like yourselves that have almost done this Batman thing, stepped out of the shadows and kind of taken people under their wing in order to help complete this process. I think that has been a very necessary part of the healing, talking about allowing people to naturally heal, but even kickstarting that natural healing process for some of us. So that's just kind of the way that my mind has been able to rationalize recently, and how people relate to it to a point where they can say, wow, that's
it's absurd. We would never ask a teacher to go back in the classroom.
right.
Nor the children, right? But particularly the teachers, we wouldn't say, hey, these kids are dismissed for the day. We need to put you over there
Sure.
At another school, and you need to continue working. But
Right.
the fact that, the jobs that you all, like crime doesn't stop, people needing the services that you all are providing never ends, right? So there's no sleep for the weary, right?
So I'm going to pull that into what our next segment, the perfect segment. So we're talking about line of duty death, right? You mentioned the department, and like teachers shouldn't go back to work, and officers impacted if they're not okay shouldn't go back to work.
Right.
What should the department's response be in this type of situation?
Goodness, yeah. So that's complex, right? Very complex, because the best policies and procedures often get thrown in the trash when something like this happens. And so first and foremost, I say, number one, you got to be ready to be flexible and adaptable. That everything that you think you were going to do, you better be ready to have that changed, and be willing to have it changed. Because in that moment, listening and hearing, observing, watching what the needs on the ground are.
Right.
I mean, what do y'all do with cops? Right? You're assessing, right, the threat and making sure, right? You know, ideally you have a plan going in, right, strategically, but that can completely change once you kind of get there and you see what's happening. So the same thing applies here, but we have to be intentionally listening to what those needs are. But first and foremost, how do you hear what people are needing? You have to be there, right? You have to be present. You have to have people, boots on the ground, that are communicating back the information, the resources, that are able to triage, to listen, to say, hey, we're noticing this and this, and we might need specific interventions or tools dedicated, because this isn't just a day-to-day event. This is a crisis. And so we've got to get and deploy the resources and the information as quickly as possible, because there's a window of opportunity that we have with anybody in a crisis, but particularly with you all in public safety, is that at some point, if you're asking for help or you're communicating a need, if I don't get you within a window, typically we say an average of 24 hours, right? With you all, it's probably a little bit less, because if I don't get to you as quickly as possible, your natural tendency is to go in and problem solve. You know what? They didn't get back to me. I'm not sitting here like this. I got to figure my way out of it. So you start to process, right? And oftentimes that natural tendency to override and fix something is going to lead that person to choosing maybe an outcome or a coping skill that isn't as adaptive, i.e. drinking, right? Or whatever it may be. It's a quick go-to. It fixes it for the minute, right? Because it numbs it, right? But long-term, again, remember I told you slowed the process. You hindered that healing process. And so I got to get to you. So I got to be there on the ground. But then we also talked about, we also don't want to hinder natural healing processes. So there's no way I'm going to sit you in a corner and say, let's have a therapy session, right? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to get, first and foremost, information out and access to resources, because in a moment of crisis, no one has the headspace to be able to process anything emotional, anything deep. They're not even hearing us half the time. We just have to have in hand resources and access to information ready to go and deployed. And then those resources and information that you have has to be on the standby, ready. Because when you get ready to begin to process and you pick up the phone, the clock starts, right? Particularly with these types, that's like rolling in to the ER, right? The clock starts as soon as we start providing an intervention, right? Particularly in a crisis, right? So there's several things that I guess in the crisis that could be done, but at the very minimum, presence, always presence, because the only way that you all, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I know me too, the only way I'm ever going to trust somebody enough to be vulnerable, to trust that they have my back when I need them, is I got to see them, right? I'm going to watch, right? Where are they? Have I made a connection with them? Are they around, right? Even if they don't do anything, are they showing up, right? So presence cannot be underrated. Now, does that mean that I need to be present all the time? No, right? But if I'm representing a team, I have to have my team present, right? So we're going to build a team that says, okay, this crisis happened, we got round the clock, right? We got shifts, right? That you aren't probably going to do anything but sit back, right? Play cards,
Right.
doing something, but you know what? You're there. So presence is the most powerful intervention that can be provided for anybody during crisis.
So when you're talking presence, are you talking leadership? Are you talking peers? Because, like internal peers are dispatched to this situation, but they're also heavily impacted by the situation as well, and maybe not equipped in the moment to take on helping at that point. So, like, who should be present, and then what what do they say? So, like, I know I've talked to people and they said, command was just hovering. They were just hovering. They weren't helping, and
Feeling
they would
helpless,
say,
I know.
They would say, "Hey, are you good?" Well, one, we never tell the correct answer to that anyway. But no, you're not good. Like, you just went through this horrific situation.
Right.
So, what are things that they can say instead of, are you good, or things that you can do? Like you've talked about basic needs, water, food, make a phone call, that kind of stuff. But what are things that the people that are supposed to be present or are sent out to help? What are things they can do in say situations?
Nothing. So sometimes the most powerful thing to say is nothing. But you know what? Just because, and I try to say, I mean, again, when you're in the situation, you can't think logically. Everything's irritable. Irritates you, right? Because you're heightened, right? You don't want anything. Nothing's comforting. So it's not that what is being said is bad, right? Because a lot of us, when we are in situations, we just want to fix it. We just want it to be better. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is we say things that we shouldn't say, right? We inevitably, and that's just discomfort with silence. That most people are not okay with just being present and not having to say things. And that's hard for you all because you're fixers, right? You're problem solvers. And in this situation, there's nothing you can do. And I feel like I have to do something, so I'm just going to say something. Right? And that may not be the best. And that's why you got to, again, read the room, right? And just be able to know, okay, what am I needing right now? And if I don't feel okay in this situation, even though it may be that I need to be there, I have to be there, that you have to be able to monitor and take care of yourself, right? Go outside for a minute, take a deep breath, walk away, get away from the, I guess, what do you call it, stimulation, right? Because too much, do something, right? Don't stay in it to where you are being activated. But that's where, too, people, your crisis responders come in, right? So when you talked about the peer team, absolutely no, the peer team doesn't immediate, especially from that agency. When you have a mass casualty or a mass critical incident like this, we never use department peer teams because even if they were not on shift that day, they are a part of the family. They wear the same uniform. And so it was an indirect impact to them. And so even as good-natured and well-intended as they may be, they still have a personal investment in those people on the other end, right? And so it's too close to home. That's why they tell people like doctors and physicians and people like that, we can't treat our family. Like, I would do them harm because it's too personal. I can't be objective. So we bring in outside, local agencies, and we activate, and a lot of their peer teams are ready. They'll come, and they will be on scene. I mean, we saw that even with this. With NC Lee, and a lot of the surrounding departments sent their peer team, right? Those officers that were trained to be there. And they are in the best position to be on the lookout, to have your six, right? They're watching, and they're able to see without being personally invested, right, to meet that need in the moment. So even in all of that, you've got to have people that can take care of you, right?
Doc, let me do my devil's advocate thing. Shannon gonna punch me in the throat for this. But let me say this, coming from just my perspective. I do agree with you to that. However, I think of it like being a little kid, right? Like if mommy and daddy you spend your time with, or even an aunt, uncle who you know that familiar face, if you're scared or you're having trouble processing something, you see them, you want to run to them, give them a hug.
Mhm.
Granted, mommy and daddy, like if I see my son come and run up to me, and he's crying, obviously I'm gonna hurt too, you know. But maybe for him, that's what he needs. He needs that familiar face.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So like, I say that because I think to agree with you, I think the best work can be done, potentially will be done from someone who isn't too close to the situation and directly impacted. But that comfort piece
Yes.
of having that familiar face, somebody who you know what I mean? Like, granted, you might have to build a bond with someone new. They might have to work on earning that trust, and they can do that, you know, especially in a place where you're just open, like, yo, I need somebody, you know, and I think that's where a lot of us have been this week. But I do know, seeing those familiar faces, talking to those people who are still somewhat close to home, that's also done a good bit of healing as well. Hurting too,
Yes.
but healing as well.
So you're right. So what we typically tell the internal care teams, we're not going to tell you not to go.
Right.
But what we're telling you is that you're going, but you're not working.
Gotcha.
Right?
Gotcha.
And we're going to pair you
Yeah.
with an external peer.
Yeah.
Right? So that you go, you comfort, you do whatever you need to do
Right.
to be part of that
Right.
healing, that process. But we also know that we can't ask you to go to work.
Yeah.
Because logically, as a peer, maybe being detached, you have to think through some things, right? You have to be able to kind of guide them to resources. And when
Right.
you're hurting directly, you can't be effective. So that's okay. We just want you to realize that.
Yeah.
But go at it, right? So, and that's where the understanding.
Because I think too, like, with that, with it being an internal peer, you're taking on, like what you talked about earlier, I'm going to help and I'm going to fix this and I'm not going to worry about myself.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few people, and my man was here earlier today, that do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's good. And, there's good and bad.
Good and bad.
Yeah.
And you
just
have to know when.
reflect.
Yeah.
It's almost like y'all doctors are on the same wavelength or something like that. I don't know. It's crazy.
It is. That's
Crazy
crazy.
how that works.
Because we spend so much time together now.
Yeah.
We're all one
Yes.
mind.
Yes. Yes.
But yes, no, you're right. Especially in crisis, you have to have the familiar.
Yeah.
You have to, because everything has just been thrown in chaos,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But again, remembering we don't want you to work
Yeah.
as a peer, and that obligation that if they don't get better, or if I don't comfort them, or if I'm not helpful, then it's my fault.
Right.
No, it's not.
Right.
Right? We just want you to be there as a friend, as a familiar face, as someone to lean on, and not in a, organized
Sure.
responsible way.
So now we're past night one. Okay, you know, you've had years, you've had people checking on you, you've done whatever you need to do, you've talked to significant others, you've done all that, and you're coming to work every day, and you're seeing peers at the office that you don't know from other agencies.
Mm.
Food is getting dropped off. You know, like at your offices, all that stuff, and that's all going to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So, what, you know, like I'm sure there's still a lot of people that are stuck on autopilot at this point, like they haven't come off yet. So what are things that, you know, I know there's a debrief coming up soon on Wednesday. Like, can we talk about the next few days and what that might look like and what the debrief is going to look like so people are familiar with that if they've not participated?
Yeah. So if you've never participated in a debrief, I strongly encourage you, especially if you've been impacted by this in any way, whether you were in the hot zone all the way to the perimeters, right? Even if you weren't at work, but you have been impacted, and maybe this has brought up other things, other calls for you. You need to be there. We're going to have things and have conversations around various things that could be helpful, right? We're not saying it's a magic pill for anybody, but it's a piece of the puzzle. It's a piece of the therapeutic or the healing process. But these next few days, I think, again, it is normal for people to want to find some sense of normalcy, like make it stop.
Right.
And the only thing we know that's consistent normal is just let me get back to work.
Right.
Right? So it's just numbing. It's distraction, right? We just want to out of sight, out of mind, and keep pushing. And that's okay to an extent, right? But at some point, you're going to have to come off, and you're going to have to deal with the elephant in the room. And so the elephant in the room could be the opportunity to come to the debrief. And the debriefs are strategically designed, right, to help people's brains start to process something that is abnormal, it's unusual, it doesn't make sense. And so when the brain experiences something that, number one, you could never anticipate being prepared for. Yeah, you read about it, you might have trained for it, but in actuality, it's never happened. Nobody's ever had a direct personal experience with this, so you don't know how you're going to react in times of this. So the brain, if you've ever listened to me talk about the brain, and particularly the left brain, and its job to kind of organize and make sense of information so that it can put it in the file cabinet. So all of your brains have gone to the file cabinet and said, mass shooting, how do I respond? Yep, empty, right? And so it's stuck on loop, right? And so your brains are trying to figure out how to finish that process. Some will naturally find its way, and others, because of, again, various individual aspects and experiences, is still needing extra information. So the debrief provides that extra information if needed. The way we like to describe a debrief is like, think of it like a big piece of puzzle. Each person that shows up to the debrief has a unique piece of puzzle. It's your perspective, right? And even though you may think that your perspective isn't important, it wasn't critical, your piece fills the puzzle. We cannot complete the puzzle without your piece. And you don't know that what you say, what you saw from your filter, your viewpoint, actually may be something that somebody in that room was struggling with because it fills in their missing piece now. So you're sharing pieces of a puzzle. But the other thing the debrief does too is it normalizes your reactions. So not only are we going to help each other fill in this just insane kind of horrific puzzle, but we're now going to be able to share our reactions because all of us, like I said, we're all different. But one thing we all have in common is we're human and we have normal reactions to abnormal events. But when we're isolated and our brains make us believe that no, nobody's felt the way I felt, they couldn't possibly understand me, the brain is trying to isolate and convince you. But once you hear, oh my goodness, I didn't know you were struggling like that. I didn't know you thought that. I didn't know you felt that. Now you're starting to see, I'm not by myself. I'm not broken. I'm not unredeemable or recoverable. And so that starts again another part of the healing process, hope, right? Because if I don't feel like my treatment the doctor's giving me is going to make me better,
Right.
It's not, right? It doesn't matter how much medicine they pump into you. The brain is so powerful that it can reject, right? And it can override what you're trying to put into your system. And so hope is powerful. So it gives you a perspective shift that despite the horrific nature of this, there is light at the end of the tunnel. It may be far down there, and I may not be able to reach it yet, but I can see it. It's there. And now the other part of the debrief is, now what? Right? So now we've got this potential opportunity for hope. What resources do we need to get through that tunnel? Right? And there's going to be information provided to you about skills and local resources and tools and things that could help get down the tunnel smoother, faster maybe, than just trying to go down the tunnel by yourself. But it really is a powerful, powerful process and experience. And I recommend that if you can be a part of it, please. They're not going to ask anybody to participate. They're not going to force anybody to participate. But they're going to strongly encourage you, again, because you carry a piece of that puzzle that somebody may need. And they need you. Right? They need you to show up and be willing to share and to offer some type of hope for them, even though you may not feel hopeful.
And part of the debrief, you talk about the symptoms and stuff you might experience, and you kind of work to normalize that, but explain it. And you said people then realize, well, I'm not the only one feeling that way too, and makes it where you feel that it's not something wrong with you, it's the situation, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that people might be experiencing right now after this incident?
So when we do the debrief, we will there's something called a teaching phase, and so we will hand every participant in the room, a sheet that is divided into specific columns, from physical symptoms all the way down to spiritual, emotional, relational. And we're going to quickly go through that, but sometimes we just ask you to take a look and see if you see yourself there. But what we tell you oftentimes is that if nothing else, take it home and give it to your family members, because they're the ones that are actually probably the true barometer for what's going on, right? Because we can convince ourselves we're fine to push through. But truly and honestly, if we're not fine, we can't hide. It's going to come out some way, right? Because it has to. Because again, the brain has to keep you alive. And if you're holding on to something toxic, it has got to get it out of you. It can't, just out of sight, out of mind. We like to think it is, but it's coming out some way to release that pressure. Because just imagine if I'm putting pressure on something, eventually the tension of it is going to cause an explosion. So the brain can allow that to happen. So it'll come out in several ways. So physical symptoms, it's not unusual that a lot of you all will experience physical symptoms because that's more acceptable. Yeah. Right? So like headaches, stomach aches, all of that. But you could have some more serious physical symptoms like chest pains, right? Weakness, feeling like you have restlessness, right? All of that's normal. But what we tell people is that if you have a physical symptom manifesting, I'm not going to look at you and say, that's a normal reaction to a critical stress incident. I'm always going to want you to go get checked out, because we never want to underestimate the fact that there could be an underlying medical, because I'm going to tell you right now, folks, severe stress can cause severe physical problems, right? You may be a completely healthy person, but placed under extreme amount of stress and distress, you can have heart attacks, you can have a stroke, right? And it's not because there's something wrong with you, it's because you just put enough heat under the fire, right? And you've caused this big explosion, a chemical dump, and that's expected. Anybody would be, under those types of extraordinary pressure to, it wouldn't be abnormal for a doctor to say, oh my goodness, okay, I can see. So you got the physical symptoms, and you'll have a whole list of those things. But then you're going to have cognitive symptoms. And so when we talk about cognitive symptoms, we have, experiences like what we call, and I don't know if you like this word or not, but this is the best way I know, it's like cognitive dumbing down. So what I mean by that is like, what you want to say, but it's like, what was I going to say? I know I was going to say something, right? And it's like you're processing. It's like, ugh. And it makes you feel dumb, right? That foggy feeling. No, that's a chemical issue, right? The brain has just had that emotional whiplash, right? And the brain is trying to figure out how to restore to normal. So it's having to come back online, right? And it's trying to process in the wake of something potentially life-threatening. right? So things like that, forgetting things, forgetting your keys, forgetting to pick the kids up, all of those things could potentially happen. And
Forgetting to call people back.
forgetting to call people back.
I think I was like that kind of before this.
Right, okay, we'll take it.
We'll take it.
Yeah. But all the way, there's some extreme symptoms that we would start to worry about, right? But those are all kind of normal things. Or even like, let's say for you all, like let's say you had to return to work, right? And you've run calls day in and day out, you are a pro. But all of a sudden, you get to this situation and you're like, okay, now I know I'm supposed to do something. And you're trying to scrounge to figure out, okay, I've done this type of call how many times, and I don't know what I do. That's normal, right? Again, you've got to give yourself time to breathe through it. But then you have things like emotional reactions, and this is the one thing that none of you all like, but it is normal, and the body has to release it. So obviously crying, but you know that when you cry, it is actually a chemical release. That is the body. If you envision like your brain and your head being like, again, this big bucket, right? The crying, the actual tears is releasing certain chemicals. That's why if you've ever had a good cry, right? And after a cry, it's like, oh, that sucked, but I feel lighter. Right? You feel lighter because you've released chemicals. So that's the brain's natural way of releasing to externally release pressure. So cry. It's okay. If you got it, if it's got to come, don't hold it back. Let it come.
But a robot's going to rust.
What are you talking about?
You know how a robot?
Yes. That's okay. I've got oil. I'll come around and oil you and shine you up.
That's funny.
But crying, so fear, anger, irritability, all of that is expected right now. So here's the caveat. When I told you that if you all don't keep those sheets, I always tell you take them home because it will come out, right?
On a call.
On a call.
Do a noise complaint after you just.
Right. Yeah. Like, what are these people doing? Right? And you're just fed up with it, right? But oftentimes it's irritability that comes at home. Oh my God, will kids be quiet? Will you quit asking me what I want for dinner? And your families are going to look at you and they're going to say, what did I do? Right?
A peanut butter jelly sandwich from a Thai shop. It just was perfect.
It was perfect. Did I set that up good? No.
Am I supposed to be telling this story? I'm going to let sleeping dogs lie.
You might as well tell it then.
Would you heard this story? But recently, there's a person who went to a restaurant with his family.
Mm-hmm.
While at this family, said person discovered that this restaurant makes peanut butter and jelly sandwiches.
Mm-hmm.
This restaurant also happened to be a Thai and Japanese steakhouse restaurant. Ask me how they got peanut butter and jelly there. I have no idea. But what I did discover is that my son found these delicious delectables and has been infatuated with them. So recently, my wife went to celebrate her friend's birthday, and like any other good husband would do when he's stuck at the house with the kids, he would call his mom.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom came down, hung out with her grandkids, and it was an amazing experience. However, I realized that there wasn't the proper sustenance in the house for the one who eats said sustenance.
Mm-hmm.
So I just simply placed a phone call to get some PB&J instead of making it at the house. I got it from a Thai food restaurant, and I actually ordered extra for him.
Mm-hmm.
And they brought it on a nice silver tray, had plastic over the top. It was amazing. Like, it was served great. Made them applesauce and blueberries. So peanut butter and jelly rolls, as a matter of fact. It wasn't like a square sandwich. These are like rolls that have like the peanut butter and jelly and he'll pull off the ends. However, now that to say this,
Fancy.
his kids don't have it. They got it good. They don't know the EBT life. So shout out to all the hard life kids, but that won't be mine. So that's the story. I'm sticking to it.
That's what you're sticking to,
Yeah,
right?
shout out to Shannon for making me realize that I spoiled my kids now.
And that's okay. Somebody told me one time, you can't spoil a kid. You can't. You can't love a kid too much, right? Now, there's a difference, right, between providing consistency, boundaries, expectations, but you can't spoil the kid. Because if you think about it, most people say, right, oh, you're spoiling your kid, because what are you doing? You're loving your kid, right? And your kid is receiving, right? And they're getting full. So at least that's what I tell myself.
Hey, listen, tell
I was on the phone with Corey, and he's like, "Yeah, my mom's at the restaurant picking up peanut butter and jelly sandwiches." And I was like, "What?"
Yeah, I was like, oh.
Y'all gonna have to learn how to make.
I started the whole conversation. I was like, when I say it in my head and when it happens in real life, it doesn't sound the same because in my mind, I know the backstory. Shannon's like, she doing what? And I was like, first of all, PB&J from a restaurant sounds crazy. Like that is definitely a house.
Thai restaurant.
It's like, how did y'all, however.
Moving on.
Thank you.
Yeah, from the PB&J. But yeah, so all the emotional reactions that we were talking about with the irritability, because again, that's going to be primary symptom. Most of you might have irritability, isolation, right? Shutting down, not wanting to really talk, maybe feeling kind of down a little bit. And the family members, if they have never experienced you in that capacity before, kind of like what you were saying, right? You've typically been the go-to, and that has been out of the ordinary for a lot of people, and they're overly concerned with you, right? But that was a normal reaction. You needed to have that alone time to kind of, for your own process to take place, because you've never experienced anything like this before. And it wasn't going to work for you to suck it up and be happy for everybody. But once a family member knows and they have this sheet, they can just almost every day get out a little checklist, right, and diagnose, okay, what symptoms am I seeing today? And the reason that I would say that it's important for them is so that they don't personalize it, so that they can remove themselves from it and say, you know what, this isn't about me. And when it doesn't become about us and it doesn't become an internal relational problem, then I can be objective enough to come to you in love and say, hey, I notice that you're having a hard time today. What can I do to help you today? Oh my goodness, right? The freeing, the space for healing to occur when there's understanding, right? And there's not this pressure to not only deal with a tragedy and trying to figure out how to get back to some normalcy, but now I got to deal with a relationship. What do you mean? There's nothing wrong with me and you, right? Get over yourself, right? And see what happens. Now relationships start to fracture, and now you're adding a crisis on top of a crisis. But we'll go through lots of symptoms, again, not just in those categories, but the number one I think most people are going to have, we're going to talk about spiritual. That the big question is why? Why did this happen? And if there is a God, why would he let these men, these good men, right? And we're going to talk about that. And we're going to say, you know what? That's an okay question, right? That is expected to happen when there is a tragedy such as this. And if you have it, don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid that you're going to offend somebody or that, somebody's going to, try to sell you on something. That those conversations actually have to happen in order for you to come to the conclusion you need to come to. Good, bad, or indifferent, right? That allows you to move forward. So you're going to have ask those questions.
I think that's a good pickup, Doc. I had a shout out to my brother Taki. Now, granted, I may be cheating by shouting him out because he is a licensed mental health professional. But what he definitely asked me that I found kind of different than the normal question, he literally just was like, hey, bro, how can I support you during this time? And I was like, that's actually a really Good question. Hey man, just do what you've been doing. Reaching out, like to be able to have an answer to provide because I'm stuck for a second. And I know y'all know me. I'm never at a loss for words. So I think when those of us, even me, when I go back and listen to this pod again, to be able to hear you say that, to be able to hear those words like, hey, as a person who is looking to help others, what do should I, would I be doing in a situation like this? Because I think that brings on a burden or a sense of grief or a sense of frustration, whatever, pick any emotion for them when they see their loved one going through something and they can't relate, they can't empathize, they can sympathize, but they don't even know how to help or what to do. And I think y'all started off by saying that, Shannon, the alley-oop to Dr. Nikki, who definitely drove the point home that, being a supporter, being present, maybe not saying anything, just being present.
That's right.
But definitely.
But, obviously, I told you all that I've never been in your shoes, but been a family member.
Absolutely.
And then a friend. That's devastating, right? And it's a helpless feeling. So when I see my loved ones suffering and I can't do anything to change it, it's overwhelming, right? So not only am I dealing with the tragedy of what happened and just the immense sadness, but now watching everybody, suffering. And I know there's nothing I can do, and that feels horrible. But I have to remember it's not my place to fix, right? And I have to step back and say, figure out, what am I needing? Because a lot of times we get busy and we need to fix something because I'm not comfortable in discomfort, right? We just need everything to go back to normal. And that's a lot of times what the families are doing. They just, their systems have gotten disrupted now. Our routines are thrown off, and we need, as human beings, normalcy, consistency. And so it's a normal tendency to try to push, but you can't push too hard, right? You've got to be willing to sit back and let the process happen. Don't let them get stuck, right? We're not saying you accept any type of behavior or reaction that is harmful or hurtful.
Yeah.
That is never acceptable. Yeah. It doesn't matter how hurt you are, right? But there are some things that maybe I have to be a little forgiving for, right? Saying, okay, I'm not going to argue with you, right now. When you feel that you can talk to me in a better tone, we'll continue this conversation, right?
So with that process, and earlier you talked about having cognitive down. Earlier you talked about, the brain processes naturally.
Yeah.
And you talked about, time frames and all that, or, it has to happen naturally, or you can't stunt it by doing certain things or whatever, and you have to be reflective. Within being reflective and having any of these symptoms you talked about, is there a time frame in which, after a certain amount of time, I've been feeling this way, I really need to go talk to somebody?
So when you think about going to the doctors or mental health, we have what we call a diagnostic criteria, right? Where we're listening and we're asking how long have these symptoms been bothering you and things like that. So typically we will say that somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks, right? Because if you think about it, we're not out of the woods yet, right? So from the time of the incident to when recovery begins, because as soon as the incident ends, right, recovery starts. So even though, you had the incident, each time that a wound gets open, because, for example, the funerals, the ongoing media attention and the reports and people wanting to talk about it, right, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it may not be helpful for you. And so it kind of pauses and delays and stunts your healing process. But in general, if there are any symptoms that are disturbing to you, go. Don't wait. But if you want to give yourself time, and what we're talking about, and you'll learn in the debriefs and things like that, there's normal reactions. There's going to be some things that will tell you that are critical symptoms that if you're noticing this in yourselves or your loved ones, don't wait, go.
Can you give us an idea?
So for example, when somebody experiences a critical incident, and we've all seen them. You all have probably seen it if you've ever gone to an incident or an accident,
Right.
where a victim, you'll look at them and they look 1,000-mile stare. That shock, and they're not able to answer questions and things like that. I mean, obviously we know that's not. But also there's this thing called dissociation, right? That somebody is sitting there and they get lost, right? That they're not there, right? Especially when they are activated emotionally. They may be able to do mundane tasks, but as soon as they start to get stressed or whatever, and they freeze and they go somewhere, right? And it's like, hey, where are you?
Yeah.
And they can't recover, right? Emotionally volatile, right? Extreme anger. There's also, starting to hear things, because believe it or not, just because, you may, like, remember I told you, baby healthy right now, if the mind experiences enough stress, it can break, right? Well, I don't mean break physically, but like the chemical imbalance, it can cause the mind to need to find a way to survive. And, it can activate, you can start hearing things and seeing things, being overly paranoid, right? So fearful that you can't let your loved one out of your sight. You can't go to sleep because I'm watching you. I can't. Those types of things, no. Those are serious. We need you to go and talk to somebody. And there's some things that we can do to alleviate that. But those are some kinds of things that we're talking about.
I'll piggyback off of that just a little bit, because when you said it, it made me think about me, just the natural person that I am, like how I would like to say I have it's crazy to sound, I got a very limited range of emotions. I'm either like myself, which is normal, happy person. I might get upset at certain things. Very rarely do I get mad. But I found myself kind of day after just being very like no emotion, kind of like whatever, lethargic. And I think that was kind of where maybe about after a day and a half, I realized it was kind of rough or dangerous for me, because I'm usually somewhere on the spectrum. But to be in purgatory is what I kind of like to say, like my emotions weren't really there. I had to do something to kickstart. And that's why I like having a strong support system. Shout out to my wife, shout out to my kids, like just being there. Of course, like I said, y'all a million times, and all my brothers and everybody that reached out. But I say all that to say, originally I was like, how long am I gonna sit like this? Like how long am I gonna feel like this and be like this? And so it was kind of one of those things where I kind of didn't want to feel any emotion, like I was cool with just like, I found like literally, I'll tell you what my first day looked like. I sat in the bed, I laid in the bed until about 2 p.m. And I was up at like 8 a.m. And I'm just like playing games on my phone, listening to music, not really, just doing mindless tasks that don't require much thinking or doing. So I found myself kind of just like, all right, I kind of like it here. I'm gonna park it here, especially after having the day that I did and feeling all the emotions that I did. I'd rather park it here. So what I'm hearing is you're saying that is okay until it gets to a point of,
You're not functioning.
right?
Yeah, you're not doing daily tasks, right? You're not able to get up, shower, get the kids' responsibilities that need, right? So that's okay.
Yeah.
That's necessary, right, for you. But then, again, it's going to start hindering. You're going to start noticing that your quality of life is starting, and things are starting to suffer because of it. That might be an indication that maybe that you don't need to go seek help, but something's got to change. Right. And so you've got to be proactive. And the way I like to describe it is, if you've ever had a physical injury, right, when you go through rehabilitation, right, PT, it hurts when you first start. You're cussing at the therapist, right? You're finding every way possible to get out of the exercises, right? But they're pushing you, right? Because they know that if they allow you to skip right? But number one, it's going to take forever to get you recovered, and you're not going to recover properly, right? So they have to push. And the hardest thing is, especially when you've been emotionally injured, right, with all of this, is it's so easy to hide, right? And most people are too scared to push, right? And because we'll get mad at you. Leave me alone. I'll cut you out of my life really quickly, right? But we all have to understand that at some point, especially the people that you love, right, that not looking at their attempt to encourage your healing as something that's controlling or manipulative or something like that. You've got to be willing to look at it for what it is that they love you too much to not let you stay there. Because not only will you lose yourself, you will lose them in the process and everything that you love. Right. And that's not fair. This incident should have never happened. And the individuals and the way it happened took too much already.
Sure.
So we can't allow them to win on this end.
So I talked to court. Was it that day I talked to you? Or was it the next day?
I'll be honest.
Yeah.
That's
And I was actually very proud of you when I talked to you. That's not weird, right?
What? Take it.
I don't give compliments.
Wait, where's the clap?
It's,
Yeah.
this one.
Oh, there we go.
They can't hear it. But I was proud of you because, you know, you told me that you felt numb and you just wanted to kind of sit there, but you're like, but I can't be here. And it's not Cairo's birthday, but I'm going to put his present together early because I just want to see his smiling face. And then later I got a video of Cairo with his birthday present.
Oh, man.
Loving
Yes.
it.
Yes.
Well, talk about, like, how did you get to that place where you made that decision to do that? And then how did that make you feel when you accomplished that?
Because I imagine you had to force yourself to because it wasn't natural.
Yeah. So the closer it got time for them to come home, because I hadn't really seen them much since it happened. I got them up for school that morning, about 5 a.m., but I was still kind of just like fog, you know, still kind of in that. So I was able to kind of reset. We talked about that sleep, Dr. Nikki. I didn't get much, but I got some, you know. And that was what I needed, but I did get rest, body rest. Mine probably didn't rest, but my body was still, you know. I didn't have anything on the agenda at that moment, and didn't need to be anywhere. So I say that because thinking about what I was currently feeling and what I was currently doing versus what my normal day to day was, because I know when Whitney, Cairo, and Zara get home, there's something that they want from me. There's something that they need from me. And if I call myself being dedicated to serving and protecting and giving myself to all of these people who I don't know, what should I be doing for the people that I do? And again, reverting back to the beginning of the conversation, selfishly enough, seeing them happy does it for me. And I was like, well, if I'm going to get out of this, I'm not going to make myself happy. There's nothing I can do for myself per se other than do for others. And I was like, man, I think that would be so dope. And it was right on cue. You know, again, there was another task that reading instructions, kind of mind numbing, just go about putting stuff together. And then I'll look at it, oh man, I got a finished project now. So not only am I doing something that I know is going to benefit my mental health, benefit my son's mental health, his mom, Zara, she doesn't, she just stands up and chills up and laughs. But anyway, it's going to benefit everybody in that moment after it's finished. So I got a task done. I like completing tasks, you know, not any man, but any person that is a builder or something like that. There's something that they do. I was able to knock that out. So I'm like, okay, I got something done. This bike actually looks good. I was like, look at me go, you know? And then we recorded a video. I told, you know, Whitney, like, hey, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. We're going to record it. And just to see his little feet running the house, he goes to his normal routine is to go in the living room, go straight to his garbage trucks, wants to turn the TV on, you know, because he's at school all day. So now he gets a little bit of TV time and some play time. But we told him he likes cleaning, ironically enough. So we're like, hey, buddy, go push the vacuum. We got a little self-cleaning vacuum. And he's like, okay, go push the vacuum. And Next thing you know, he's in the hallway, and in the hallway of walking down towards the vacuum, I had the motorcycle kind of set up for me. You can see him kind of slow down, start the process of going on, and he's just kind of like in awe. And I'm like, hey, buddy, that's yours, you know. And he's like, hey, this. And when he says this, he was pointing at a button to push. I said, okay, you want to push it? Yeah. So once he starts it, gets on the bike, and he's like happy, he's, you know, I was like, man, that is what I needed. When my mind told me to do that while I was sitting there, that's what I pictured. And that response from him, that reaction from everyone in the house, that energy that I was able to help create for myself, again, selfishly enough, was what I needed to kind of jumpstart that process. And then from there, it's just been, you know, not as much of a roller coaster. The hills aren't as far up and down. They're still there. We're still going through it, all three of us, you know, everybody who's here, everybody who's listening. However, I was able to get out of purgatory, what I call it. So, yeah, and I'll make sure I send it directly to Shannon because she's the only person I was having that conversation with. Because I told Shannon, she was the first voice that I heard of the day. I didn't really want to talk. I didn't want to say, but I know one thing about my sister, especially when I start missing her phone calls. I was like, if Shannon has my address, so I know she's not far away. She would be at the front door. I said, before that happens, let me answer this phone call. And I was like, yo, this is what I needed. So in certain ways, Shannon, you kind of help stimulate that process as well. So I'm grateful. Doc, like I said, I get your autograph every time we show up because every time we talk to this is like a live counseling. Even before this situation, I'm always
You
like,
start charging them, Doc. What
yo,
has it been? Sessions?
yeah, that's how I'm like, yo, people, I'm telling y'all right now, the Addicts podcast gives you these jewels and these gems, but me and Shannon, me particularly, I speak for myself. I get the best seat in the house by listening to y'all talk, by just being a spectator and a participant in this conversation because I grow from it. And that's the goal, right? That's the goal of what we do here. We want whoever's listening to this to have a similar or same experience. And if nobody else listens to this, I guarantee you this is meaningful and it's impactful because Shannon knows me. I'll listen to these things 450 times. I'm telling you, like if we got views for every time we individually listen, you know, we be at millions by now. So I say that because I'm grateful for y'all. I'm grateful.
But you bring up the most important part of the healing is just connecting and having conversations.
Yeah.
There's nothing magic to what, you know, a lot of people do. Now, there is sometimes very strategic training that people need to have and to listen and to know how to help the body and the brain process in an adaptive healing way. But at the very minimum, we're all wired to, we want to communicate. Maybe we don't have the words, but just being around people that get us and that aren't judging how we might say something or whatever is often all we need. So I encourage you to find somebody just to talk to, even if it doesn't make sense. Just have a conversation to get it out, to start that process, the healing process.
So I'm going to go into some, I guess, scenario-based questions in a way, just from things I've been hearing from people as far as their processing. And I guess the first one would be like, we talked about why and all that. What would you tell someone? Because I've heard this a lot. I was on the day off, and they're struggling with that form of, I guess, survivor's guilt in a way, like they didn't get to be. You talked about being helpless, being helpless, all that, but they didn't get to be there that day with their people.
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, obviously, there's nothing anybody can do to take away anybody's pain. But just give yourself the opportunity to sit back and look at, you know, where were you? And you were more than likely where you needed to be. Because, number one, just flooding that scene with more than what was there, the numbers could have increased, right? So everyone, and this is where you probably will get me into my faith head here just a second. There was no mistake, right? That person had, unfortunately, a free will, and he chose to do evil with that free will. But by God, there's also somebody more powerful that day that showed up. And he protected everyone by placing people where they were to be in that moment to keep the tragedy, to keep the numbers from going as much as it was. And so even though we can't see it now, it doesn't make sense. There's a lot of questions. There was purpose right there. What the enemy meant to destroy on the outside of that, there's always somebody greater coming to make that pain have valuable purpose. So every life that was saved, by being impacted, you don't know what your next big calling is going to be, who you will be able to help because your life was saved, what call next. And so, give yourself credit, because even still, think about your families, right? The life that you still have left to live, right? It wasn't your time, right? And thank goodness that you didn't go against it, right? You were where you were needed to be. But that's what I was talking about, within the debrief, that, everybody's got to come through that journey themselves. And when I'm talking to people, I'm like, well, my God that I know, do you know how many times I yell at him? And I tell him, I'm mad at you. I don't understand. You're going to have to show up. If you want me to believe what you're telling me is true, you're going to have to show up and tell me. And he does. It may not be in the time I want it, how I want it, but I will promise every time I've asked and I looked him in the face or on my knees and prayed, say, you're going to have to show me, God, because right now I don't want to believe. And he's going to be like, all right, deal. Right? And he comes and every time smacks me in the face and has to look at me and say, Nikki, I've been there all along, but I love you. I know you got a hot temper sometimes. I know you're going to question me, but I still love you regardless. And I'm bigger than you and bigger than your pain and bigger than your anger. So give it. So ask it, yell, question, do what you need to do to find your way. And you may not come to the same conclusion that I do. And that's okay, right? But you still have to give yourself the opportunity to struggle. But don't struggle by yourself. Get other perspectives. Listen. Be willing when you're ready. Because that's the thing. Don't do it if you're not willing and ready to receive different perspectives. Because it's not going to help anybody. Timing is important. So that's kind of my answer to
take that a little bit further. Some officers were injured to go to the hospital to find out the guys they came on that call with are deceased.
Mm-hmm.
How do we help them process in that same way?
Yeah. So obviously being there for them. And I think, when I was thinking about, the service with Eyer's wife, and something that she said was, very powerful, and just even thinking about legacy, right? Eyer's legacy was that little boy that he's left behind, and how it's important that people, if you have stories, and to continue to share. But knowing that the men, even though we may not have known them directly, that their legacy, right, that their death was not and will not be in vain, right? And so the fact that maybe they were injured, and thank goodness it wasn't as detrimental as that, but there's purpose now. Like, don't make it go to waste. Even their pain, right? That's not an insignificant wound, right? Because, on the scheme of things, right, it's not, if you triage, it's not death, right? But that's when you put all the pieces together. How did they get the wound? Where were they? What were they doing? All of that. That's not an insignificant wound. But just being there for them, listening to them, just loving on them, checking in, and being willing to not let them get stuck in the negative loop, right? Love them enough to say, I'm not going to let you hold on to that guilt. That guilt is not yours, because it was misplaced there. So don't let them, let them go through their emotions and things like that. But at some point, love them enough to say no, right, and help them through. But just be there and consistently show up, because what is going to end up happening, inevitably, and not intentionally, I think the world is going to go back to a rhythm. And right,
Next day.
right, and after all of these, ceremonies of their lives come to an end, the public and the influx of cards and food and people checking in, they will have to return to a normal rhythm too, that they don't have the time or the resources. But we have to keep showing up, right? When you tell somebody you're going to be there, be there. If you can't, that's okay. Don't tell them, right? And just know your limits too, because we all have to take a break. But the healing begins after everybody's gone. So especially with these guys too.
So, I think to double back and double down on what Dr. Nikki was saying, one thing, and I guess just continue to enlighten people. So we talked about this, if you've been listening to the pod, but I worked in North Carolina for 8 years, right? And I had the honor and pleasure of working with Josh for 6 of those, give or take. However, Nico said it best while speaking at the funeral. Him and Maddox, they basically were saying, hey, Josh Eyer's fluent speak, he's full throughout. That's very evident by how he did it. That's very serious. Like, I know sometimes people want to make people seem like superheroes after their passing, but he's everything that everyone said he is, and that's because that's just who he is, But I think the best way for them is, and those who know him, especially that division, how we have always been so close, considering the history behind the place. Unfortunately, this is not the first tragedy that we've experienced. However, I say that because knowing who he is and what he would expect from you as a partner can give you the strength and that energy to say, hey, look, he wasn't very super sentimental. He's definitely like, excuse my language, but he's a belt to ass person. So like, he's very respectful, does his job in a very, very well manner, but he's gonna go, and that's what he's gonna want from you. He's gonna want for you to go. He just won officer of the month. He just won officer of the year. And that doesn't come by just being very passive or lethargic in your job. He's put his best foot forward every single time. I tell people this. I posted a picture of us in roll call when he was a rookie. But I would tell him this. I'm like, hey, you're not really a rookie, man, because he came in with a presence about him that some of us, myself included, I was a 21-year-old when I started, but he came in with a presence about him, like he's ready to get busy, and he's the perfect person for the division. Like, he's gonna joke with you, you know what I mean? Like, he's gonna give it to you just as much as he's willing to receive it, and that was it, man. We have a culture there where if we're not picking on you, we might not see you as like the cream of the crop, and he can dish it as well as he can take it. But I say that because those of us who are like, hey, what are we to do now? Those of us who weren't, some of us who weren't initially there, some of us who didn't get there at all. Myself, who got there, a little bit after it started. But it's like, while you're out there processing, doing work and stuff like that, and experiencing it, and once it's all said and done, especially not knowing the other 3 gentlemen who lost their lives that day, but we got to keep it pushing for them, whether that be professionally or personally. Everybody knows how much, if you know Josh, you know how much he loved Ashley and Andrew. Like Andrew was born in 21. Whitney got pregnant with Cairo in 21. When I found out I was having a son, he was basically giving me, I'm telling you, it's amazing. We're having this back and forth. Him being a Army guy and I'm an Air Force guy. Those are the things, like, I came from drill today. So being there today, is another part of, like, hey, I know Eyer served and I know how much being in the Army meant to him. I always talk to him about, come on, bro, come to the Air Force. I said, listen, man, we'll cut you a sweet deal, And he's like, excuse my language again. Fuck no. It's like, Army through and through, man. He put in so much time and did so well, and how well he did there. It's just how well he did there. And I don't want to discount all of the people that he was an NCO and a non-commissioned officer for. He was definitely a leader to a lot of people. Even though he didn't have more time one to me, there's a lot of things that I was able to take from him, look up to him for that. So again, I'm rambling, but I'm saying this with a purpose to say that those of us who didn't make it to the scene, who were on days off, who got to the scene a little bit late, who were in there in the midst of the of the fire with everybody else, the rest of us have to do what he would expect from us, and just continue to love, continue to do well at what we do. But definitely reaching out to number one, each other, but absolutely keeping Andrew and Ashley in mind, keeping, like Ashley asked from all of us at the funeral, keeping that spirit alive, letting Andrew know who his dad was, who his dad is, and know that he carries a very strong DNA. It's not a burden at all. It's an honor. Honor for me to share space and the presence with him at some point, but couldn't imagine sharing the same genetics. His family, his father, his sisters, aunts, whomever, in-laws, best friends, all of us who know him or knew any of the, and I can say this for all other three individuals too, although I didn't know them, I would assume those are heroes. Not assume I know those are heroes, but assume that their family will be saying the same things as well. Keep moving for them and do the best way we know how. And y'all providing those tools that help calm them down.
I think his childhood best friend, you remember when he was speaking, he said that his story is not ended. A new chapter begins, right? So it begins a little differently, right? But it begins within each one of you, right? What you take from what you know personally about them, what you feel like, you were able to learn and gain, and what he would, expect, right? And just moving forward to be better, even if we didn't know him, right? And or whatever, knowing that the ultimate sacrifice that he made, and the fact that this moment in time is giving everyone an opportunity to pause and say, how can I be better? Having the privilege and opportunity to hear his wife's incredible bravery, to be up there to share. I couldn't do it, right? But that she spoke to every one of us that we didn't have the privilege and the honor to serve with him. But by goodness, was there a big message there, even for me, to say, Nikki, be better, love better, right? Think about the ways in which you can continue his story, right? And to continue the honor, the service that all of these men have done. So, if nothing else, right?
Nothing else.
Nothing else.
100%.
So, the Cyber Monday, obviously, call goes out, everybody goes running to the scene. But it also came out over media and social media, and family sees this, and they start checking locations on phones and calling, not getting answers, and all that. You have all the families, and then you have the families that were directly impacted by the deceased included. I imagine there's a lot of people that don't know want their significant other going back to work. Kids don't want their parents to go back to work. What do we say to those people? What they might be experiencing, going through right now, how they maybe navigate?
Again, yeah, but it's also an expected question, right? And don't feel bad for having that. Don't feel ashamed or guilty. Have the conversation. And for the officer or the people that were, let them have the conversation, right? Because it doesn't mean that it's inevitable that your career, you've got to make the choice. No, that you have to give them space to express the fear and the very real possibility. It's come and hit home, right? And so you need to have the opportunity to share. But also, if you don't feel like you can, right, you need to talk to somebody about it. You do not need to hold it in. You do not need to just keep your mouth shut and suck it up, because that will change you. It has to. Because if I'm scared of losing you, I can't keep you close, right? So the intimacy or the connection that you desire to have with that person can't happen. Because there's always this fear that it's inevitable that I'm going to lose you. And for your brain to keep you safe, it's going to need to build an emotional wall, a barrier between you and your partner to where you can't connect, right? Because that loss is going to be too great. So you can't hold on to it. You've got to find a way to express it and find a way to communicate it, even if it's not directly with them. Find a way to process it yourself and come to a decision or a conclusion that is acceptable and adaptable for you. So have it, don't stop it.
So, a couple more things, and then we'll kind of wrap up with resources. Police were not the only people that responded. So you have fire, medic, other agencies responded. Crime scene, dispatch was impacted, the ER staff, and then anybody that responded as far as coming to help. How do we, I guess, help them kind of navigate through this too? Because a lot of times they get kind of pushed off to the outskirts of what is needed and help, and
family, or not the first people to think about. But speaking of that, some of these people are actually seeing the exact trauma, those images that some of us didn't have to see. Thank God for it, but they have to bear that burden. And although they may not have that personal connection, depending, watching all of us speak, seeing all the news, all the media, how much people cared about him. Now they start to feel like, hey, I knew him too. Now I have those images, those things to process in mind. So I could see her and listen to those calls. I think when Wendy was talking about this, about being able to only read one part of the story. She's reading so many books and not being able to finish one. That's one of the ones where, like, hey, as a dispatcher, you're on the call, but you don't know what's happening out there. You don't know what now, everything. But I didn't mean to hijack this question. But
and then crime scene comes in after and has to, I was talking to someone the other night, and they were talking about how they had to process one of the vests of a marshal. Like, you have to take pictures, you have to put it in evidence, you have to do this, you have to get all the casings at the scene, and you're literally in the aftermath of all that and expected to process that. But you're pushed to the back, you're not recognized with everybody else.
Right. It's not the immediacy. Right. And even when you go to the ER staff, right? Because a lot of people think that, okay, I handed them off, the scene's clear. But when I was talking to the doctors and some of the nurses there's this extreme sense of, we failed you. This was the last line of hope. You're bringing them to me to save, right? And I couldn't do it, right? And now I've, disappointed and taken, the opportunity for a family. And, not one time, but 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and there's no win, right? They didn't get a win that day, and that's what they are, lifesavers, right? They're trained to help life, and so to see that, but then you're intimately touching, right? You're connecting to a person, you're feeling them, you're seeing and sensories, and so it's devastating, all the way even to the ME. I mean, my goodness. So everyone has a unique perspective, and that's why I said the piece of the puzzle. So that's why I was saying that in an ideal situation, we like to have what we call a multi-agency debrief. So everyone gets every single opportunity from beginning of the call, when things come out, right, to on scene, to all the way to the end when we prepare them to be laid to rest, right, or to come up, with the ME. It's their final say so. So you'll get to hear, but each one of those pieces, like you said, the dispatchers, they didn't get to finish that chapter, and the ME they started at the end, right? So they didn't. How did we get here to all this devastation? So everyone needs the opportunity to fill in those spaces, because I told you all before that our brains do this magnificent, wonderful, irritating, very horrible thing. But when we don't know something, we make it up, right? Because our brains have to complete the loop, right? We have to know. And so we create this idea, assumptions of what we think happens, and it's oftentimes worse than what happened. And once we get the information, then we're like, oh my goodness, it relieves tension. And so debriefs provide the opportunity to get information to fill in that gap, so we're not assuming. We're not creating this false narrative and ultimately increasing our distress. So, but yeah, they need to be recognized too for the work that they did, and we all have to just look at each other instead of like the turf wars, right? That I know that everybody likes to tease each other about, but truly and honestly cross, right? Tell them thank you, right? Because they had your back, when you all were coming. They were there and ready for the call, and just realize that we're one family. It was one incident. We had different roles in the family, but it's one family. And so that shift needs to.
I think we need to do a better job with just within the profession.
Yeah.
Like how we can, as officers, support each other better too.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's constant comparing or dogging or doing whatever instead of being on the same team and maybe supporting each other.
Yeah.
Last question. Helpers. You, psychologists, therapists, everybody that's kind of been activated into doing this. What are you guys doing, or what are you doing to kind of take care of yourself in this, and then seek help as well? Because this is a department of, I don't know how many y'all have now, but employees-wise, it's civilian, it's sworn, and then you have medic, and you have the marshals, and you have, the task force. And, there's so many people involved, and obviously one person can't manage it. But people are taking on a massive amount of, I guess, clients or, people that they're talking to. How are you and other people managing that? And what resources, what ways can we help you or support you in what you're doing?
So as helpers, we have to lean on each other. Like, we can't help in isolation. We're going to have to check in on each other and kind of do what we tell you all to do, peer support, right? Hey. So one of the things that a lot of the people that are around me have actually been doing, maybe you all saw today even what happened, they followed behind me and hand me my water, right? They're like, Nikki, you haven't drank water.
I gave her a Dr. Coke.
And and I needed that. I needed that, right? Because I had to get my blood sugar.
I saw it.
She saw it and she helped
Dog
me.
needs a Dr. Coke.
But we have to be, willing and surround ourselves knowing that we're about to go in. Again, we have to be self-aware and know when we're in over our heads, because that's the number one rule: do no harm, right? And if I'm in a position where I don't have the ability, the resources, the knowledge, the train, whatever it may be, to respond, how dare me? Get out, right? Because I don't need enough casualty to it. And so I have to know when to remove myself and to, even take a break, because I can get to the point to where I'm so burnt out and I'm not going to be effective. And how that is unfortunate for me to be there with someone in their moment of need and I have nothing to give them, right? And I know that about myself, right? I know I'm running on empty, but I'm choosing to stay, which means I'm ultimately choosing to give that person half of me. And that to me is unethical. Just for me, morally, I can't do that. And so I have to be willing to step back and say, you're talking about like what things do I need to do, like take care of myself, have breaks. But sometimes, to be honest, I mean, a lot of helpers, but even a lot of people that are involved, not directly, but are watching this, are going to possibly experience what we call vicarious trauma. So we're hearing the stories. And as therapists, we're not there involved, but we hear it, right? And sometimes so vividly that I didn't need to be there. I'm there with you, right? And so that vicarious trauma, we may have to then have another competent, trained professional that can work with us. Even though we have skills and we have training, when we become personally activated, all that stuff goes out the window. Just like I've told you all that, when you have critical incidents, my coping skills, what I may have been able to use before, red alert, nothing is working. So I might have to go and have a refresher, an outside person tell me, hey, what I hear is this, let's try this. And then I can go into my toolbox because I may have it, I just didn't know to use it. But I've got to be intentional and taken care of. But, at the end of the day, I have to know my limits. And I can't, just because I want to help somebody does not mean I'm the person to help them. Again, I have to look at what's my capacity, right? What do I got going on in my personal life? Can I balance all of this? But also look at the training that I have, because as good intention as most people are, and they want to come out and help right now, you can unintentionally do harm. Right, because that's like asking a medic or a SWAT, people to show up. That we need specialty, we need expertise, and you send kindergartner out there to do. They may have dipped their toe in I see, that's a gun, right? That's a play gun, right? But they don't know how to use it, particularly in these types of situations. So a lot of people assume too that if I have trauma training, okay, that's a foundation, right? But just because I have a foundation in trauma training does not then make me culturally and professionally competent to deal with a specific population training, right? That requires extra training on top of it. Just like, you have your specialties in medical, they went extra to get certified, right? To be able to call themselves a specialist in a certain area. They all have medical school, basic, but you're not going to ask a dermatologist to go and do brain surgery, right? Oh, why? Because you went to medical school? No. You have to show evidence that you have not only cultural competence, but you have the training to be in the area. And if you don't need to put yourself in there, because you're going to inevitably do harm. You are. Even though you don't intend to, right, it's inevitable. You don't have the tools and the resources to show up to the game, right? And then two, again, knowing your limits, because a lot of people, again, most people think they understand what you all experience because they've watched TV, right? And they've heard a few stories, or Oh, I do fine watching horror movies and I can see all that gore and stuff. That is completely different than actually experiencing it. Having another individual who was there intimately experiencing it and having a normal, like having a reaction to it, real, live. And for you to be able to stay grounded even within yourself to access help in the moment, just like you all are trained. They train you to be level-headed, to respond without panicking into situations. This is a level, right, in a field, unfortunately, that requires a certain temperament for a professional, a certain skill level, and a certain just knowledge and awareness of your own abilities and what you can hear and not hear.
That's self-aware.
Yeah, that darn thing keeps showing up all the time. Yeah.
So, how are you?
So how am I doing? Tired, but I'm doing okay. I have my moments where I have to cry because my heart's so heavy for all of you. But I have some really good people that check in on me and that remind me to take care of myself or to sleep and stuff like that, and that is helping me. But also talking about it, having people that I can talk about, that I can say what I want to say, and then they give me space to feel it, but then come back at me and say, okay, and what I heard you say was this. And yeah, that's right. And how's that working for you? Right. So, but yeah.
So, I guess the last thing we'll talk about is resources. I'm gonna be nice, but so with not just this department, but a lot of agencies, you know, they either have peer support, they don't have peer support. Everybody has EIP, and maybe have telehealth. Which that was the response I got from them. Like, we have telehealth, and I'm like. One agency, they had EAP, and it was one person for their EAP, and that one person in that county saw all the people that all the officers or social workers or anybody that would seek them out would deal with. And I was like, how does that work? And that there are departments where their insurance won't cover. So like I will say with CMPD, their insurance, it's $10 copay. That's pretty awesome.
Right.
The teachers, I think in North Carolina, their copay is $0, which is amazing because they need it right now. Some is you have to pay the full price. Like if you want to go to therapy, you got to pay 100, 120, 130, whatever the hourly rate is. And cops can't afford that. Especially if it's PTSD or you're going for a critical incident, you're not going one time.
Right.
You're going multiple times. And EAP is what, 6 visits, 3 visits, I don't know, but like, and then it stops. And I know at this agency you can go to the one-stop shop or whatever, but they're not. What is it? The Marathon Health One Stop, whatever you guys say. Yeah. But they don't do long-term stuff, right? It's just short. Couple sessions and try to get you on your way. And then they have case management. They don't have actual internal crisis response outside of peers. And then so like this that it's like the resources are so limited. So if someone is hearing this and they want to reach out for help, they want to talk to someone. I know you got Presby Psych, which is with the FOP, and that's 6 free visits, right?
Yes.
And then they figure it out from there. What other resources might we have available in that as well?
So with a lot of the local resources or therapists, we can put it up on the page to give people choices and options of people that they can talk with and connect with. But even some of the things that you've mentioned, people know that you can always call me, and I have people that work with me that we have trained specifically to work within these agencies, this type of culture. And so I think that's really critical, right? But at the very least, there's some things that you need to ask your therapist, especially knowing and trying to figure out what it is, first and foremost, what are you going for, right? So there's a difference between, an officer experiencing a critical incident, having PTSD symptoms, trying to figure out how do I get squared again so I, effective at my job, I'm safe at my job. That's going to take specialty, right? Somebody understanding this job, understanding kind of maybe what, not in detail, but understanding job requirements and ultimate why we need you to be safe, right? And to be able to listen for things that could potentially hinder that, because what a traditionally trained counselor might say, oh my goodness, that's concerning. I might listen to and say, okay, let me listen to this in the frame of reference from your job, right? And how you're trained and what you're doing and how is this benefiting you? Is it hurting you, right? I might then bring awareness to you and say, hey, we need to make sure this is not happening up here too. Right, you've got to be able to compartmentalize that if that particular behavior or symptom is starting to overflow into personal, then I'm going to kind of be more intentional about we got to stop that, right? Or at least narrow it down to where I only get it over here in this particular area that you're working with. So I'm going to have to help you learn how to specialize it, compartmentalize, because it's serving a purpose. And that purpose could be life-saving. But we need to understand that, right? And they need to know how to ask the right questions. And again, trauma training is essential, but it's not the end all. That's just the beginning. So you have to understand the culture and then obviously the individual from doing that. So, ask them, certain things about, what is their experience working with first responders? How long have they been? I mean, just because somebody says that they have, well, ask them to share maybe something specific so that you can listen to see, do they really understand your family, your field of work? If they ask you, why is that important? Oh, it's important, because it's a cultural understanding. It's connection, right? So they trust. Absolutely. And just ask them, what is your training outside of your degree? What specialty? And how do you see it being applied to my situation? Ask them that. Like, how do you see
So
that?
how does women's issues and self-esteem apply to it?
Right. Right. So your expertise, how do you see that informing practice? Right? That's okay. Right? Because every therapist has a professional disclosure statement. Right? That is telling you who we are and how we understand and how we are taking our training and understanding to best serve you.
Right.
It's hard. That's your warranty right there. Like, you get to look and see, okay, do I want to buy this?
Right.
Invest it, right? And then as you're looking at that, ask questions. Well, okay, you're a nice person. You're a caring person. But how is your training, how has it informed you to be able to help me in this situation? Right? Are there specific techniques or skills or interventions, resources, and things that you have that are unique to being able to help me? Right? And if not, okay, let me move on. Right? But don't just take somebody at face value just because they say that they don't know. This is too serious to just not do your due diligence, right? Just
Possible.
get the best possible, and the fit. Because I will tell you, there will be some of you all that do not want anybody that knows anything about your field, right?
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Because you need to get away from it, right? You need a completely and totally different perspective, and that's good, right? So you have a little bit more broader option from that perspective. And I say, do that, right? But you have to know, first and foremost, what are you looking for? Because every counselor is going to ask you when you walk through their door is, how can I help you? What do you need? Sometimes you won't know what you need, and that's okay, right? That's our job, to kind of be there with you and try to help maybe ask and navigate to see what we can do. But at the very minimum, you know what got you there. I'm not sleeping. I'm whatever. Start there and then go. But as far as resources, obviously, we can put those things up. There's national resources and things like that. Because I know the FOP and stuff like that are going to have some resources up on their page. What is it? COPS, some other websites that can link you to resources and information so that you can start figuring out how to build your toolboxes, not only for you, but your family, and to have information to share with your friends.
So I'm not one to like sell a product or a person or I guess I won't make a recommendation unless I truly believe and trust in that. And like especially with therapists, like if I don't know you, I'm not going to refer you. Like I need to meet you and know you and build some kind of level of trust before I refer you to an officer. But I would say, Dr. Nikki, I would refer you 5,000 times over if I could. If the whole world could have a Dr. Nikki, it would be a better place. I've seen your heart. I've seen how you interact with people. I've seen how people respond to you. I've seen how people leave the room with you in like events like this lighter. Like it was a good thing that they came and talked. And I know it's a lot of unloading on you. We get on you about that. Make sure you take care of yourself. But the Rock of Refuge is your thing. And I'm going to ask you to say your website in a second. But I also was part of a conversation earlier this week in which you kind of got called on that by Aaron. And he said, you can't do this yourself.
No, I cannot.
So you had 95 calls in one day requesting you. And I'm sure that's increased since then. But you are one person. You already have your own client base. You work for a department. You're here just, helping because that's who you are. But we're trying to build a team too. So
Yes.
you also have people that you trust and you will refer out. And I think it's great because I've seen, like Campbell and other officers are going to school to get their mental health, like their degrees, so they can be therapists and they can be that culturally competent therapist too. So in the future we're going to have more options, but like right now, my referral is Dr. Nikki and her friends. So if you can tell us a phone number or website or something that they can go check that at, or just reach out to one of us and we'll get you the info. But perfect person to talk to or get somebody on the team to talk to.
I told you, every session.
Well,
session for me.
Yeah, but that's why, I say that if I can't or if I don't have the answer, I'm going to find it. We're not just going to leave, and sometimes, I kick myself up about this too because there's so much need sometimes and I get lost and overwhelmed and I don't mean to drop the ball sometimes, but it's when you get so overwhelmed, you have to know, when to say stop because the flood can start coming because just the simple act of not calling back when you're supposed to, that's horrible. And, I'm guilty of it sometimes. But, that's the other thing, too, when you're talking about how to know about resources. So particularly if I'm saying that I work with a first responder, right, particularly, I know that you all work 24/7, right? And so even if I have office hours, right, let's say that because I have to have quality of life and I've got to live my life too. But the minute I get the message from a first responder, the time's ticking. I've got to be on the ball. I've got to have somebody calling, sending a message, making a referral. I got it. Just at very minimum, saying, hey, I got your message. We'll be calling you back shortly. Somebody within the next few hours is going to call, touch base, at least hear a person on the other end. You can't be waiting, right? And that's why even still, even with me, I know we have to build the bridge and we have to build resources because if I can't get you an appointment, within that window of time, I'm going to lose you, right? And you're going to find a way to go, suck it up, and keep moving.
And to that, I think that people need to understand too, you are one person and there's a billion people in this world. And if Doc doesn't respond to you, I know I've gotten calls, I haven't heard from Doc and I'm like, all right, let me call. But you have to be patient too. Like if it's an immediate need, then yeah, we'll figure something out. But we have to understand too that we don't have access to you 24/7. There are boundaries. We need to accept that, and we have to be able to be patient because whatever it is we have is not going to be fixed in that moment. It's long term, and we need to be able to be understanding of that too and respectful of that because I know a lot of people are like, give me that magic pill right now. Right. I need this to go away. Yeah.
That's right. 988, yes. And again, that's just most of the time when people are in that position, it's just talking, connecting with somebody. And the one thing that I've heard that all of you need right now, particularly first responders, public safety, everybody that's helpers. Remember I said that we like to fix things and we like to have goals. You actually opened up the perfect segue when you were talking about you had a project to do.
We all need a Lego set.
You do. Something small little goals. That is the one way that you can at least start the healing process and to feel better, is set little goals, right? If you've been needing to paint a room or something like that, look at those things and set a task and set an agenda to accomplish that, baby steps. That is something that's going to be needed right now and important so that you don't sit idle and get consumed and stuck. So, but yeah, I mean, we've got to do better. Dr. K, who is here with me, she's my, what we're Batman and Robin, right? She's my right hand, and she's a psychiatric nurse practitioner, so she's the medicine to my brain.
You've heard her on our sleep podcast.
Yeah. And so, we balance each other. But one of the things that we both have been saying that our hearts have been really pulled towards is creating training, giving a space for people that want to learn how to do this and how to show up to be a presence that will be received and that can be received. Like that, there's certain things that we can teach you. But there's certain things that you just naturally have to have that we can't teach, but we can guide you and show you and give you some pointers on, how to refine that, right? Because I know I'm not everybody's cup of tea. I know that. I'm not going to be able to help everybody. Right. But there is somebody there that I know that you might connect with better in the long run. So there's resources out there. There's people. You have to sometimes, like you said, be patient.
It's like, hey, we'll set the boundaries for you, Doc. Don't worry about it.
All right. So hopefully we answered at least some questions today. We tried to touch on a lot of topics. If not, we can come back and you can shoot us some questions. But Rock of Refuge Counseling Center, you can Google it. The number is 704-709-1147. That's 704-709-1147. It's in Gastonia, but...
And I will tell you, that when you go to the website and it says, and there's a button that says contact or connect with us, when you submit that form on the bottom, it typically will go to the person that manages that and it dings, right? So we oftentimes will see that sometimes before we even get to phone calls. Because, phone calls, we got to, you can read faster than sometimes you can hear.
So go to therockofrefuge.com, TheRockofRefuge.com, and send a message.
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day. So I was in the Rock, or visiting the Rock, in refuge, because especially in a time of, tragedy and crisis, I think we all just need a place.
How divine is that?
Yes. So it's dual purpose for me, because, again, I told you all about my faith, because I know that my ultimate rock and my refuge is something bigger than me. But for everybody else, in times of crisis, we need a rock to stabilize us when we're kind of, out and about, and everybody needs a refuge, a place to rest.
So I moved to Elkin.
Yes. How sweet that is. Yeah.
Well, it's past my bedtime.
That it is.
We talked about sleep. My bedtime's 8:30.
Yep, you are late.
10:30, and I got an hour and a half drive back to my refuge.
Yes.
I love you guys.
Yes.
It's been real.
It's time to go. We got to go.
All right. We appreciate everybody. We love you.
Yes.
Josh, we love you, buddy. Ashley, Andrew, all of our following. We love you. Have a good night.
Yeah.
99 problems and I fixed it. Got my mind spinning, I feel dizzy. Cause some people love, now they miss me. I've been feeling low, I gotta hit save. I've been feeling low, I gotta hit save. A little time on my mind, let me find my peace. Write a hook in a book and rewind the beat.